Hello, this is Sister Denise, and I am with the San Francisco branch of the Brahma Kumaris World Spiritual Organization, or sometimes called University, because here we study spiritual matters. And this series is called The Convergence of Psychological and Spiritual Work. And this is because it is my perception and belief that we need to do both these things in parallel, psychological work and spiritual work. And in many ways, we would normally think that the psychological and the spiritual would be one and the same thing. But because of the convention that psychological work falls under the scientific medical side of life and spiritual falls under the religious side of life, there is a separation. Today's program is called Emotional Dependence. And this is quite a deep subject. From the point of view of spirituality, we would say that all feelings occur in the soul. From a psychological angle, it is said that all feelings occur in the brain, and there is no mention of the soul, or very rarely. Usually it is looked at as a behavioral matter. But I approach everything from the angle of the soul, because my studies have shown me that it is indeed the human soul who performs all actions through the body, and it is the human soul who experiences everything that a person says they experience, that experience is in the soul, and in particular in the mind. And the mind is the attribute of the soul where feelings are experienced. In fact, the mind is the part of the soul that registers experience. We in Brahma Kumaris, we talk about the soul having three main faculties. One is the mind, one is the intellect, one is the sanskaras. And sanskaras is a word from Sanskrit which refers to your individuality, your personality, your tendencies, and your mind. So subtle. Your mind is like a very subtle, invisible sense organ. You might see something, and I'm going to make reference to the current circumstances of the world, because it is so big what is going on at the moment. In many, many cities of the United States, there are protests going on about the way that people of color are treated by the white majority. And these protests are being supported by other protests in many, many other parts of the world. And the world is in a tremendous amount of stress and struggle and challenge. And this problem between communities, between races, is particularly strong in the United States, and it is not less strong in the other parts of the world. But I think it is spoken about and played out in a very bigger way in the United States. I'm speaking here from San Francisco, and this is a city that is in a way well known for how tolerant it is. But on the other side of the San Francisco Bay, there's Oakland. And Oakland is a place where there is a very large Black community, and this is a place where a lot of the movement for equality, for equal opportunity, for a voice has emerged. So it's a very big center of this conversation, this debate. And all of these things that are going on erupt into violence, into murder, into people treating each other really badly. And today I heard something that I would think hardly anyone knows. I'm not sure if it is true, but it came from a reliable source. And I found it rather intriguing and interesting that the police officer who was arraigned for murdering George Floyd, the two of them actually worked in the same nightclub as bouncers, and so they knew each other before this event. And this is strange. I think it hasn't come up before, but I think it may be true. And it may also be that there was a karmic account between the two. And I'm flagging this up because this subject of karmic accounts is, I think, quite an important key for us to understand how it is that people find themselves on opposite sides of a big divide, and they engage with each other and damage each other, and it turns into something really big. This incident in which George Floyd was killed, it happens from time to time, this kind of thing. And this has really flared up very enormously because it has touched the emotions of people. And because we are on this subject of emotions, I'm bringing up this current situation, the emotions we feel. And when a human being hurts, kills, damages another human being who is in a weak position, those who see it, who know about it, experience outrage and moral indignation. And there are many ways in which this plays out. Children getting abused by sometimes parents, sometimes relatives, sometimes school teachers, sometimes sports coaches, sometimes strangers, women in a weak position getting abused by abusive husbands or bosses at work, because the social setup that we have has created a belief in, I suppose it's connected with this idea of survival of the fittest, and the fittest being the strongest. So whoever is strong goes by the way of might is right. And then you have someone in power abusing someone who is not in power, and then everybody feels this strong emotion of outrage, the emotion of injustice, the emotion of how can this happen? When are we going to learn? I remember in 1992, the statement that came out was, "Why can't we all get along?" A rhetorical question which has not really produced a clear and satisfactory answer. And the message that we see in this situation is, I can't breathe, or we can't breathe, or take your knees off of our necks. And so we have a situation globally in so many different ways where one section of people is oppressing another section of people, and there is an emotional response to that, which of course translates into action. It is, in a way, revolutionary times that we find ourselves in. And revolutionary times take place from time to time when this inequality and this oppression reach a certain pitch where one incident will open up a huge tsunami of blood and rage and outrage and solidarity and so on. And then after some time, having erupted like a massive human volcano, it eventually quietens down, but the problem doesn't get resolved. It just quietens down until something else triggers another eruption. And I'm taking this up under the topic of emotional dependence. And I want to take a look at emotional dependence now, looking at an individual with emotional dependence. And what do I really mean by emotional dependence? Because this phrase is interpreted in a number of different ways by different people who use the phrase. And they may be coming from a psychological angle or sociological angle. So I would like to clarify what I mean by that. And what I mean is that you live your life with something that we call in our spiritual practice as attachment. This word attachment refers to, or is another word for emotional dependence, but it's used in the terminology of spirituality from India. So I'm using this word because of this. Attachment means, or emotional dependence means, that for your emotional well-being, you need someone to love you, someone to care for you, someone to acknowledge who you are, to reflect you back to yourself, to provide you with love and structure as a very small child growing up. This is the relationship between children and parents. And the young of a human being needs care and structure from the parents and the family structure for quite a long time. And so there is a natural, healthy emotional dependence, but where it becomes unhealthy is where there is a shift to the other side of the balance, where emotional dependence makes a person weak. So as a small child, you go through well-known stages which have been described by the well-known psychological founders and fathers and mothers of psychology, the development of a child. And if the child experiences trauma, in the period of time when they are emotionally dependent on their parents and the family home, this trauma, which very often will come directly from those who are supposed to be providing the emotional support, this will cause a wound in the soul. So this becomes a psychological problem, and it also becomes a spiritual problem. And we have to work on this wound, to heal this wound, both from a psychological angle as well as from a spiritual angle. And it has been said by those who do these studies that the overwhelming majority, as much as 94% of people in the United States, I don't know about the other countries, but I am fairly convinced that it is the same across the world because of different reasons, but that almost everyone grows up in a dysfunctional family, which could be extremely dysfunctional or slightly dysfunctional. There's a big spectrum. But it's a very rare one who will grow up in a functional family. That means a person whose emotional dependence is weaned at the right rate, at the right age, and then a person becomes emotionally self-sufficient. And that means that their emotional connections with other people do not take that person away from their personal power, but it is consistent with them being in their power. And so what happens when a person is wounded as a child is they will go into some kind of a survival mode. And this will produce the ego defense mechanisms. And you must have experienced interacting with people who you say this person is behaving like a child, having a temper tantrum like a child. And this is an indication of someone whose upbringing on some level prevented that person from reaching emotional self-sufficiency, so that in adulthood they will display the characteristics of an emotionally immature child. But when they're 45, 50, 55 years old, it really doesn't go over very well. And we would say that that person has a serious character defect, which may even reach the point where they will need to have psychological therapy and so on and so forth. So, so this is what I mean by emotional dependence. One of the things that I noted particularly in connection with this lockdown that everyone in the world has had to deal with, the lockdown connected with the coronavirus pandemic. So when people are under lockdown, they get extra stress. I don't know the statistics for other countries, but 40 million Americans suddenly became out of work, and the number of unemployed shot up to about 30-35% within a month or two. And this is a country of people who are not known for saving. It is a country where people use credit cards, live on credit, and people who are of low income, which also corresponds to the majority of people of color. You see, this is especially hard hitting. And then you add to that a murder, which was videotaped by the onlookers and sent through the social media which went viral, and everybody saw this. And so this outrage was a response to a variety of pressures, but it focused on this one incident which symbolized this huge, rather nebulous pressure that everyone is feeling. And so this symbol became the trigger to allow or to prompt everyone to give a very specific reaction. And it is an emotional feeling, and it is also moral outrage, because the souls of all the people who are feeling this, the soul will say, this is not right. And it is not the emotion that says this is not right, it is actually the intellect. So I just will mention a little bit about the difference between what we call the mind and the intellect. So the mind is where the emotions are felt, and the mind doesn't know the difference between right and wrong. It just knows really good experience and really bad experience, and the spectrum in between. Whether it's right or not is not the concern of the mind. That is the concern of what we call the intellect, which is the part of consciousness where conscience sits. Your conscience says this is not right. And the mind and the conscience, when they come together, and it becomes, this is not right, I feel outraged, and you are erupting into action because there is this feeling, I have to do something about it. I cannot just stand by and do nothing. And this is people who have had to endure an accumulation of situations which are not right. And that can go back to childhood. It goes back to feeling not well treated. It goes back to feeling disrespected, to having unfair treatment, to being discriminated against when it comes to education, when it comes to opportunities, when it comes to place to live. So many, many things. And this accumulates and accumulates and accumulates. And all of it is part of the multiplicity of traumas that wound an individual again and again and again. So here we have a lot of people carrying these wounds. And the thing that I found interesting is that with all this lockdown, people were allowed to go out for essential services or essential shops. And so they were allowed to go to grocery stores, you need food, to pharmacy, you need medication, to casinos, I don't know if you need to do gambling, to bars, I'm not sure if you need to have alcohol as an essential thing, and the gun shops, you see. So these three things, the casinos, the bars, and the gun shops, they are essential for people who are living in fear and whose response to fear is to be violent, people who are addicted to gambling, people who are addicted to alcohol. And when you are addicted in this way, this is an indication of spiritual weakness and also of psychological weakness. And so an addiction is both a spiritual problem as well as a psychological problem. And if a person is in this situation and they're experiencing the pressure of the loss of job, the discrimination, the higher incidence of exposure to coronavirus, because the people of color are the people who had a larger majority of cases. And so this then became another indication of bias against, you see. And so you have this huge emotional eruption. And it's emotional, it's also philosophical, it's social, it's psychological, it's political, all of these things converging together. And when the soul is weak, then it's bigger than you. And because this question has never been adequately clarified, there isn't a solution. And so what we are working with in the spiritual practice of Raj Yoga, which is what I do, is to look essentially at identity, because it's about identity ultimately. And what is the identity of a human being? In answer to Rodney King's statement, why can't we all just get along? It is because people are seen as the body. The body could be black or white. If your body is black, your situation is different because it's black, or because it's of color, or because it's white. And so this is called discrimination on the basis of color. And this deep subject of discrimination, I'm going to actually take a look at it on Sunday, San Francisco time, 9 o'clock on a different Zoom, so that if you want to participate in that, we will let you know about that. But this is because we learn in spiritual practice about something called the power of discrimination, which we also call the power of discernment. Because on what basis do you evaluate another human being? And you cannot evaluate a person effectively if you judge a person on the basis of the color of their body, because it neither proves nor disproves anything about their being. It's nothing to do with the soul. And so a person needs to know that the self is not a body, and the other people are also not bodies. You see. The other discrimination that is on the basis of the body is gender discrimination. It's also a huge problem because of thinking a person is either male or female. No, the soul has a male or female body, but that doesn't prove or disprove the quality of the soul. It's nothing about the person. The actual identity of a person is I am a human being. And human bodies come in different genders and different colors, but the human being, there are big differences between human beings in terms of integrity, in terms of purity, in terms of love, in terms of what motivates you to act in a certain way. And all these things are to do with the soul. It doesn't make any difference what kind of body you're in. And so this is really the key information that is needed. And this is also where I think we ultimately have to bring psychological and spiritual understanding and information together, because the psyche, that start of the word psychology, and the word psychology means information about the soul, except that they don't interpret it like that, because the psyche is the Greek word for the soul. And so if you are a spiritually inclined person, for you it will be so clear that you have to be a soul. You must be a soul. You are a soul. But then what is a soul? How does a soul function? And in some discussions I was having with one of my colleagues here at the center, when we were discussing, how we communicate these things to other people who are studying this, and what do we focus on. And I was saying that the root problem, in my opinion, is not various negative characteristics like the usual suspects of greed, anger, lust, attachment, and ego. This is how it's always defined. And I was saying, no, I don't agree with that. To me, these are symptoms. They're not really the root. To me, the root is that the soul is depleted, the soul is weak. And so what is needed is not to weaken a soul further by punishing them, making them feel guilty and shame and all of this. That's not going to do anything positive at all. It's going to make a person feel weaker and more resentful, and it's going to actually increase the negative behavior, negative self-image, and confusion. And so my feeling is what we need to do is to encourage a person to come into their power, regardless of if you are male or female, or your body is black or white or colored, or whatever your language is, whatever your culture is, whatever the differences are in those areas. The one thing everyone has in common is everyone's soul is at a very, very weak state. And a soul which is weak will act against the voice of conscience. And you'll act against the voice of conscience under the influence of a strong negative emotion that is provoked by a sense impression that disturbs you or displeases you. So if you see something cruel, you'll be disturbed. If you see somebody doing something very nice to you, you'll be happy. So you're switching between this pleasure-pain principle, which is not the same as if it's pleasant, it must be good, and if it's painful, it must be bad. Things are not really that simple at all. So we need to understand things in a much more subtle way. So now, what should we do to strengthen the soul? Because when the soul is strong, then you can act according to the silent little voice of conscience. Sometimes that little voice of conscience is so quiet and so, maybe you can say, fed up that nobody listens to it, that it stops speaking, But actually, the greatest guide for anyone is really the voice of conscience. And when I've spoken with people from all different backgrounds, and all different conditions and situations, and high and low and left and right and all colors and all traditions, the one thing I see in common Everyone has a conscience. And those who are the most badly wounded and the most badly violated, very often they will switch off that voice altogether because the wound that they're carrying is so painful that it causes them to switch that off, because what they've experienced is so much antagonistic to what conscience stands for that they just say, I'm turning this off and I will, respond from my emotions. And there is a logic in the emotions that is very compelling. And the logic that comes from study, from spiritual wisdom, and so on, is so subtle and so deep that we need peace and quiet and wise people to discuss these things with. Otherwise, we can never really come out of all the sort of, I can say, propaganda that we have grown up with. Much propaganda. We grow up with the customary social attitudes of our surroundings, our environment. We grow up with the attitudes of our educators and our religious leaders. And to find something real, something genuine, something that is seeing a person as a being with rights, with feelings, with a heart, with a wound, that we don't find that too much. So in this place of study that we have here, we're trying to really look at things from that place. And so how do I become emotionally self-sufficient from a state of emotional dependence? So first of all, I would clarify that emotional dependence is a symptom that arises when the soul is carrying a deep wound and a deep trauma, because the love that nourishes a soul from their time of this birth and as they grow up, that love was poisoned or broken or missing, or it was displaced by hatred, by disrespect, by many, many negative things. And then that soul gets a deep hole in it, a hole which nothing seems to be able to fill, because that soul was so wounded. And so it turns into character defects, addictions, violence, all sorts of things, because the soul does not have the power to endure the circumstances that so many people have to bear in this day and age. So spiritual practice is, to me, a very important key. Spiritual practice is a combination of study, really studying what am I and what I have a right to in terms of the energy that sustains myself, the spiritual being, the soul. And secondly, I need access to the source of love, which is greater than human love. When a person has a big hole in their soul or a broken heart, a deep wound, they're looking for healing, and love is a very healing energy. And so people look for love because they need it, because that wound needs to be attended to. And love is a very, very attractive energy to give the soul relief that it craves. But you must have experienced so often disappointment in love, that the one you love couldn't love you enough because they themselves are depleted. Or you couldn't love them enough because you yourself are depleted. Or circumstances got in the way and your relationship of a hope, of exchange of love was broken by situations, circumstances, illness, accident, people getting in the way of it, and that other mystery called karmic accounts. I won't go into karmic accounts so much in this session, but on Sunday at 5 o'clock San Francisco time, we're going through the series of karma, destiny, and choice. And there I talk a lot about the karma aspect. So you could join me for knowing about the karma on Sunday evenings. But here, the emotional dependence that forms when you see somebody that you fall in love with, or who falls in love with you, or somebody starts to care from you and then for you, and then they can't maintain it, they can't keep it up. And there's so much pain that goes together with love, and you feel so betrayed and so shortchanged in matters of love, where you open yourself up only to get some sort of a knife put into your already pained heart, and then you will go for maybe the addictive substances. This is a very common progression, and so we need to connect with ourselves first of all. Big question: do you love yourself? Do you know how to love yourself? Are you selfish? There are many people who are narcissistic and they love themselves so much that they don't realize that that is selfishness. And there are many selfish people around. But the selfish person who's always thinking me, doesn't know really how to give in the balanced proportion. And so they end up bereft because of selfishness. But there are also many who hate themselves. Sometimes when something really bad is done to you, and you can't do something bad to who did something bad to you, but you turn it against yourself. This becomes your survival thing. And then it is self-harm, and you don't love yourself, you sabotage your chances, you do not protect yourself, you may be suicidal even, because you rather hurt yourself than somebody else, because hurting somebody else goes against your principles. But what to do with your pain? Turn it against the self. So there are people who do that, many people who do that. And this also creates an emotional dependence. It gets a bit complex, this kind of emotional dependence, because you're always looking for something as a support to lean on, but which invariably fails you. It's the emotional dependence. Loving yourself from a spiritual angle means to honor who you are, to honor the self that I have rights. I am a child of the Creator. I am a pure, peaceful, powerful, loveful, blissful being of light, and I'm here and I'm immortal and I have value. And so there, It doesn't mean I'm against anyone, but I am asserting my right to be and my right to have a place in this world, my right to take care of myself and to live my life according to the deep feeling of my heart, which is deeper than an emotion. I think something much deeper than an emotion. Emotion is like an energy that comes from there. It could be positive, could be negative, but the deep feeling that I have a right to be and to take care of myself, I call that much deeper than an emotion. And so now I, the soul, who have all this right to be, and I know that I'm a pure, peaceful, powerful, loveful, blissful being of light, but my levels are low. I don't have enough love, peace, purity, all this. I need to sustain myself. And so emotional independence also means that you know how to feed yourself from a reliable source. And to me, the most reliable source is the soul who is completely full and who never gets empty. And this is how I see God, the Supreme Being, the ocean of love. There is enough love in that being to satisfy every single one of us with the deepest, blackest, darkest hole in the soul they may have. But it can be filled from that source, but not from any other source. This is so strengthening and so healing that it is capable of bringing us back to balance, back to spiritual and psychological health, and consequently to be able to interact in terms of social health in a very healthy way. So you develop healthy boundaries, healthy relationships, you understand what space you need, you give other people their space, you understand how to interact in a balanced way where it is mutually beneficial. You understand how to give regard and respect and love and honor, and you don't go beyond, not too much and not insufficient. And this kind of balance is really the end product of this convergence of psychological and spiritual work, where you ultimately experience in a very practical way that you are in your power, that you are healthy, really healthy, and that you can function, your conscience is reliable, your heart is open and strong, and you are fully self-actualized, you can say, and you enjoy shining and living in the light of God, the Supreme Being. So I will stop there and let us just have a few moments quiet together and really feel for the emotional, social, psychological, and philosophical distress that is being felt by so many in the world today. And just allow your heart to spread these feelings of sweetness, love, compassion, strength, and try to let yourself be an open conduit so that it's coming through you from a higher source. Just go into that silence and stillness for a few minutes. that stillness coming over you. The quietness of knowing yourself as a pure being of light. And seeing others as your brothers and sisters, pure beings of light, though wounded and distressed. And let the stillness of your heart and the peace of your being reach them. Let it flow throughout the world. A healing, calming, compassionate energy. And then gently let yourself come back to your normal everyday stage of being, and at the same time keep it close to you so you're never very far away from this. Thank you very much.
So this is a big topic, Sister Denise, emotional dependence. And even I was reading something about this, and I've come across that the freedom of conscience is even today protected by the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Everyone has the right of freedom of thought, conscience, religion. So to such an extent, this has to be written, put into paper, but who follows? who follows the rules? So anyway, let me read some comment from Facebook here. Just a second, Sister Denise. I have about how many pages to read. Just one is, thank you for your honest sharing, Sister Denise. Yes, I have read about Floyd and the police who killed him being a former colleague. We actually saw that also in the news very early in the days before or right after, the day after. Here. Thank you, Sister Denise, for this topic. It gave me additional understanding about emotional karma. I'll just read it as is it that all the successful people in this world are born with a strong soul, or they realized that this is the secret to making their dreams come true?
It's a little more complicated than that. It's not quite so clear cut. Let me give you a number of points. And what the question you're asking is really connected with karma, and also connected with that different souls are of different strengths. Some souls have many lives and some souls have less lives. Some souls have only one life. So it varies a lot. So one cause of success, depending on how you define success, but I'll give you the definition that we use in Brahma Kumari. Success is where you have quite enough money to do whatever you want to do, very good health, and very good relationships. So if you have all three of these, you're really successful. Some people have one of them or two of them, but only a few have all three. So they're souls who have done really good karma in all areas. And so you get success because of having earned it. because of good actions that you have done over a series of lives, in which you can't remember, of course, because you can't remember anything except this life. And another reason for success is if you just arrived and you're like a new soul, because when a soul first arrives on earth, they have success. And then as time goes by, their energy reduces. Maybe they start to do a bit of negative karma, and this will eat away at their possibility of success. So these are, the two main things that create that. And of course, everybody wishes to be successful and feels they have a right to be successful, but they need to know philosophy of karma in order to really get a good grasp of this thing called success. And so in my practice and my study, I really focus on the two things. One is that my karma should be really good, and I should be right with myself, that I walk my talk and all of this. And then the other is that I draw spiritual energy into myself and keep on replenishing myself. So I need to keep this balance of replenishment and then putting out. And then I would say that I will be successful if I do all that.
We know we should listen to the consciousness, but many a times we cannot distinguish between emotional suggestions and consciousness suggestion, how to differentiate.
Yeah, that's right. You can't differentiate because there's a big, competition going on inside your being for who is the most important voice. And very often it's the voice of emotion that says, this is me. And then the voice of conscience, I distinguish between consciousness and conscience. And conscience is like a little voice which says, well, okay, I understand how you feel, but actually, if you do that, there'll be negative consequences. So the conscience is really evaluating and knowing, if you do this, what will happen? If you do that, what will happen? Whereas the emotions say, this is what I'm feeling, and this is what I'm going to do, and I don't care what happens. And so it's good if the voice of conscience has a good place in the inner world of your consciousness, because it's very reliable. And there are sayings,
Jerry.
never make a decision when you are experiencing a lot of emotion, because
Very clear.
the emotion dies down and then later on you may regret. So always it's a good idea to wait until the heat of the emotion has cooled down before you make decisions or take action.
I mean, we know that the Vice President of the United States is making headlines also. His point is over what is happening over there. And in the CBS News headline says, or just a second, silence on hate is complicity. There can be no realization of the American dream without grappling with the original sin of slavery.
This word original sin is actually defined by Saint Augustine 500 years after Jesus Christ. And it refers to the loss of contact with your spirit. And you start to identify with the body. And racism came after that. So if you use this word original sin of racism, you're actually bringing in religion and politics together. And in the United States, it's quite important, according to the Constitution, to keep religion and state separate. But Mr. Trump had a photo opportunity using a Bible. This had really created an emotional response. And I think that, we have to really look at not trying to punish people, but at trying to really see what a person is. Because if you do that and say this is a sin and that is, you kind of keep going this way, that way, this way, that way, and you never really arrive at facing the reality that every single person in this country is a human being first. And that you have to focus on that, a human being with a human heart. And the culture looks at color, language, gender, and at the moment the attention is on the race question. A few months ago, the attention was on the misogyny question, and every time a big problem comes, we generalize it, but we don't take it all the way that we need to take it. And that is that, a soul in a child's body is no less of a soul than a soul in an adult body. And when you get born, you don't acquire a soul, you acquire a body. You already are a soul. And so we have to really, I think again and again, souls do not have an age, they don't have a gender, they don't have a culture or a color.
You mentioned about the killing of Floyd and the relationship between the cop and Floyd. So this is a clarification. Do you mean to imply or to say that the killing of Floyd allowed him, meaning the soul, pay his karmic accounts? I know you said we will not talk about karma, but it seems like this. But and then a related question to that is, do we carry, or does person carry the urge? Because I don't have another word for it. Carry the urge to act violently in the next life, so that it gets triggered by, let's say, another karmic account or situation.
I think it can be. Not every soul carries that, but I mentioned this word sanskaras, and so that if you do a lot of activity that involves a lot of violence in your life, then you develop the sanskara of violence, and that becomes an urge that appears in your subsequent life. And in answer to the first question you gave me, it could possibly be that these two souls have some unresolved problem, but I don't think it would have been resolved through one of them killing the other one. Because what's happening now is that the one who caused the death of George Floyd is on trial for murder, and other police officers who were connected are also appearing in court, and it appears that they were very inadequately trained as police. I just caught that from the news. There's so much going on, and to catch everything and get the right information is also quite a lot of work. But it's a very complex situation. And if you look at the history of the relationship between the Europeans and Africa, and then America, you see, which is a land of a land which was originally populated by the Native Americans, who themselves were pushed into reservations and dehumanized and made into wards of the state. They don't have the same rights as the other people in the country, even now. And then you see slaves from Africa were brought in extremely horrific conditions. And this became the chain gangs, building the railways, and the blues. Some the music, the blues came from that, you know. And then, of course, there was the people who had colonized Africa, who would use the Africans as slaves, and it was very brutal. And then the religion created a vocabulary which made it okay to do that somehow. And, you know, this is added and added and added. There's an escalation. And you see, even if you go to Europe, where I came from, and, you know, there was the First World War, the Second World War, and before that, and lots of problems between different sets of people, which every so often erupts in war. And it goes back 1,000 years, more than 1,000 years, 2,000 years, maybe more than that. And so you have an eruption and it quietens down, and then again eruption happens, and now it's happening so much. And this it is said in some religions that the cup of sin overflows, and when it reaches an absolute maximum, then it stops. And so the question arises, is it bad enough? And I think until it's bad enough, like how did the Second World War stop? It stopped with the Hiroshima and Nagasaki nuclear bombs being thrown, because nobody could carry on after that. It was too much for people. They said, no. Cannot fight against this. Surrender. And what happened after that? You know, the Cold War. And now we have conventional weapons that are as effective as those nuclear bombs, and they're legal because they're called conventional weapons. Just because they're conventional doesn't make them okay, you know. So the all of science is used to develop military might. And so we have a world where, you know, the most power is defined in terms of money and military firepower and this economic hold that people have over each other. And so the entire humanity is kind of devouring itself, and it is scary what's going on if you really look at it closely. And what is the solution to this? To me, it is to let go of that that perception of people, the way we perceive people, and look at the soul and look at the heart and say, wait a minute, what's going on? We can't do this. And turn the direction of the world to another way. And this is what I think spirituality is all about, because all that is materialism to the maximum degree. So we need to go the opposite way. Spirituality, I think.
It says here, I have listened to one of your classes many years back in which I remember you mentioned about something like the method of regression, allowing your mind to go back to memories of your troubled past and changing your approach or response to those incidents. On my own, I have used this process in dealing with many of the traumatic past which lead to dependency addiction and submissiveness to my present state. I could trace back memories as far as when I was about 2 years old. So my questions are, what are the indications slash signs that I have come to terms with a particular event of the past? Is there any psychological or spiritual healing happening? And the next question is this method safe for all?
Well, looking at the first question, one indication is if you can look at that memory with dispassion. It's a sign that you've come to terms with it and you can lay it to rest. It doesn't make it okay. It doesn't mean you forgive and forget or anything like that, but you have worked through it. You've gone back to it, you've seen it. Maybe it happened in childhood and you go back to it as an adult and you look after yourself as an adult and bring yourself up to your adult stage, and you lay it to rest, and then you can move on, because otherwise it holds you back. You see, you can't get on with your life as long as this thing is, choking you. So in that sense, I would say that definitely you have done very well, and you have really done good work and brought yourself up to the present day, as it were. And I think that it's a good way, and it works differently on different people and for different types of traumas. And whatever I was talking about many years ago, I'm sure I'm talking slightly differently now. There should be some development, I'm hoping. And I can't really remember what I was talking about many years ago, but my whole process has been a development, a learning, experimentation, and growing. And so, yeah, I think that's the same for all of us.
Yes, so Sister Denise, we need to fill our souls with strength and love and peace from God so that we are emotionally independent, but it is going to take a long time. How can we spread love with which most of us need?
Well, I think that if you go to the source and really open up to it and really take it in, it doesn't take so much time. I've heard a lot of people tell me that these things take a lot of time. And in some respects they do. But when you do it with the rawness and accuracy, it's a matter of a second, because you just turning things around quickly. And so I think it doesn't necessarily take a long time. And I think also a lot of people are feeling, time is speeding up, time is running out. So we can't allow it to take a long time. We need it now. We need it quick. And I think that God is very aware of our sincerity and our wish to achieve this, and is right with us and helping us. So we will be okay.
Sister Denise, if we are incarnating in different skin color, how would discrimination, karma be solved?
Well, I think quite easily, because if you know that I have had a birth as a Black, as an Indian, as a Chinese, as a white, I've been everything and everywhere. So, we're all humans. I know that's the case for me, but that's just me. And so I am able to connect with people, any color, any religion, whatever, because it's soul to soul, and because I have a feeling for people, and there's a resonance, and And I'm very fortunate in that way, I think. But that's me. That's who I am. I think you have to be in contact with it, you know. When you practice spirituality and you think you're a soul and you think about your many lives and so on and so forth, you kind of get all the attributes of all your many lives to come up from the subconscious, and you activate them all and you bring them all into this life in some way, and then the totality of you is there all together. And we tried for this. This is nice.
Sometimes the emotional dependency can take in the form of one trying to look perfect in others' eyes. Number two, agreeing with others just for the sake of it. Number three, can't say no. And these are so subtle that the person may not realize it, especially when this is in the context of spiritual community. What do I need to do so it's not just superficially looking good, but that I am honoring myself?
Yeah, this is the thing. A lot of people have suffering from looking good syndrome, which is really very artificial. And the people tell you you should be like this, and you have to be like that, and you should smile, and you should do this, and you should dress like this, and have your hair like that, and blah blah blah, and you should like this and not like that. And then you betray yourself, you see. So it's really a balance. And sometimes I say to people that one of the things that we learn in our spiritual practice is that we are actors and we had to put on masks. And in the theater and film and the ancient ceremonies, they use masks, and you put on characters and so on. And you can do it true, being really true, and come through that character, or you can be false. And the thing that's really important is to be true. And so, you may be in a situation where if you don't agree with someone, there's a major war. And so it doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but you can speak in such a way that they don't know whether you agree with them or not. And you say something. So you need the art of communicating, bearing in mind that you don't have to give your opinion on everything, and you can interact with people in such a way that you speak if you want to speak, and if you don't want to speak, you can say something which is like not saying anything. And these are various different ways that you can use because you have a right to your privacy. You have a right to not speak. You have to deal with conventions and protocols and so on and so forth. But you can definitely find ways to let people know where you stand, and without being confrontational. So these are skills, communication skills. They can be learned.
Just a short greeting from Nepal. A follow-up question, if I have to rephrase it, am I right to say that people who don't discriminate may be old souls?
I think so. I mean, the people I know who I think of as really old souls, they don't look at people as skin or gender or culture. I think in the ancient times, the really ancient times, when people were really conscious of the soul, and they would see the soul naturally, they would maintain that vision where you just go right through the body to the being and interact with that being.
In a world that may see me as a victim of circumstances, how can I push against the label and rise above the victim label?
Well, I think as soon as anybody uses the word victim, you find another word and say, excuse me, I'm a student of life. I'm not a victim of circumstances, something like that. So immediately challenge them and set them, give them a different label to put on you because you don't like that label. No, I'm not a victim of circumstances. I have a situation which is here to carry me forwards and upwards. I'm no victim. Sorry. Stand up for yourself. I think it's very important to, this whole thing of coming into your power, of standing up for yourself, but without being confrontational. And we have to practice this in lots of different ways, and we have a right to do that.
Okay, so a question here related to what you're saying, I think. Please, it says here, I'm asked to give my opinion because a lot of times I'm asked to give my opinion because most of the time I just agree with the authority. I mostly do not have an opinion. Does that affect my spiritual growth?
Well, if you don't have an opinion, then you can say, I don't have an opinion on this subject. I don't care one way or the other.
I had my own thinking.
Something that I use as a kind of a thing, I don't know what you would call it, a method, when it's a matter of taste, I don't really bother much. When it's a matter of principle, then I give my opinion. If somebody says, you want the walls blue or pink? I say, I really don't care, paint them whatever you want. If it was up to me, but it's not up to me, so I don't have an opinion. And if really somebody wants my thought, I will only give it if I think that they will take it into consideration. If I think that they will just do the opposite or something, I'm not going to give my opinion. I'm not going to let people put me in a position of asking for my opinion and then rejecting it. I won't let them do that. So you have to discern. You have to be a good judge of character. You need discrimination for that.
If I am practicing meditation, how long does it take to recover from several emotional deep wounds, which are still continuing?
Well, I think that your entire life is a journey, and when you have these deep wounds, they're going to surface in different ways through your entire life. They're companions that go with you, and that as you continue with your life, you make your peace with them, and they become elements which bring you into a certain kind of wisdom, a certain kind of compassion. You may become a wounded healer, which is a very powerful kind of healer. A wound is not necessarily a bad thing, but it needs to be attended to. And you can use this wound to carry you forward even, because everything has significance. Just because it's a wound doesn't mean it's bad. I mean, we live in a world of morality, which is all about this is good and this is bad. But in spirituality, I have learned that it's not really about good and bad. It's about this is what it is. And now, what are you going to do with it so that it contributes to your personal development? And it doesn't have to be a handicap at all. So it's up to you how you position it. And if you think that everything is there for a reason, for a purpose, to to carry you forward, then you don't look at it as a bad thing or as a misfortune. It is what it is, and it is a potential, it has potential to enrich me. So let me take that.
While listening to you, you talked about, I mean, how to help others by enabling their personal power. It says here, but in my religion, we are taught about eternal damnation, Sister Denise, eternal damnation. What does the Brahma Kumaris believe? Is
Oh,
there such?
eternal damnation is terribly final, isn't it? No,
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think that there is such a thing as you are accountable. You have to be held accountable, and you have to pay your debts. And once you've paid your debts, however expensive they are, then you go into stillness, and that is everyone. In Brahma Kumaris, there's this idea that we look at the world as cycles, and when one cycle finishes, then everyone has to settle their karmic accounts, and then they return to the world of light, and they stay in silence for some period of time, but it's a timeless place, so you don't know, you're just quiet, and you might experience that your debt is so heavy that the settlement of that debt feels like eternal damnation, but it won't actually be eternal damnation. The difference between feelings and facts.
If the cause is spiritual depletion, you talk about a lot about weakness in terms of spiritual depletion, then it will take a long time before we see change in the world happening. Your comment.
Well, how long does it take to fill a glass of water? If you do it drop by drop, it will take a long time. But if you turn the tap on full, it's a matter of seconds. So I think it's all to do with the intensity of your connection with the source. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, it doesn't follow that it takes a long time.
Mm-hmm.
We usually talk about it as it takes a long time, but time is a very deceptive thing, I remember listening to an interview with George Harrison from a long time ago, and he was saying, I don't know where the last 40 years went. It just went in a flash. And I also feel like this. It's a flash. And the most powerful time is the present time. And there's all sorts of things that led up to this. And then this will lead to all sorts of other things. But our sense of time is so variable and so subjective that that I think sometimes we make an assumption that this will take a long time, therefore it's too hard. We make these if then based on premises which are not reliable. So I think it's better to say, I will do it. However much time it takes, I will do it, and I will have enough time to do it. Think about it like that. I think it's more practical.
Mm-hmm. Another greeting from Trinidad.
Oh, thank you.
Oh. Let me read this. But this one is talking about another session of yours, Fireside Chat. So let me just read and see if you would like to respond to it. It says in your YouTube series Fireside Chats with Miguel Pile, you mentioned about different kinds of pain. Can you tell us about tolerating physical pain?
Tolerating physical pain, it's quite hard, and usually the medical profession will give you different pain medication and ultimately morphine. And people who have cancer usually continue with Sprits of morphine until their last moments. And this enables them to handle the psychological part of leaving their body. And but if you have chronic pain, as many people do, and you come to a point, because most of these pain medications are highly addictive, and one of the big problems is with the opioids, which are very, very addictive. And then you almost have to make a choice. Do you want to be an addict or not? If you say, okay, I can't stand the pain, so I'll become an addict, it really weakens you. And so you may not want to go that way. And if you say, okay, I'll take the pain, then you have to learn how to separate from your body so that you can actually endure. And you need to make friends with the pain, because the pain is a great teacher, and it comes to tell you something very, very important, which it cannot tell you as long as you resist the pain. It has to intensify the amount of pain before its message can get through. So surrendering to the pain is a very important moment. And then it leaves you because it's done its work.
And a thank you note from Brother Vivek from Vancouver. It says here, Sister Denise, your clear thought process helps me get over fear of losing things, which makes me fearless and giving me power that I belong to God, who loves me so much that at every action I take, I find His presence, support, and success in work, with happiness in the heart and soul, feeling peaceful. Thank you for your vast knowledge, which helps me a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Last question is, give us some tips. And the question is it love or emotional dependency?
Which you have to
How to determine is it love or emotional dependency?
Oh, no. Emotional dependence is emotional dependence and love is love. These two are not at all the same thing, but maybe emotional dependence masquerades as love.
Yes.
Love is...
Let us take the mask out to see Denise.
Take the mask off. Emotional dependence is when you're needy, you see. And in an emotional dependence, you get upset when you get rejected. Love, you give love, and if someone doesn't take it, that's their problem, not yours. You know, and you're not needy. You don't need somebody to love you. If you need someone to love you, that's emotional dependence. But if you can be, you know, I'm taking my sustenance from beyond, and I let that pass to my brothers and sisters. And if you don't like it, okay. And if you don't return, okay, because I do not need it. Dependence is a psychological and a physical neediness. It's like an addiction. Emotional dependence, you're addicted to people.
Last words, Sister Denise?
Yeah. Last words.
Last words.
Keep your heart, you know, open and soft, and take the sustenance from God and let it spread in its own way. You don't have to make it spread or something like that. Just let it go where it has to go. Like, let God do with it whatever He wants, and be free and easy and no worries. Have faith in yourself and have faith that everything will be okay. It may be a bumpy ride, but put your seatbelt on and you'll be all right. Don't forget you're immortal, and that you know, it's a big drama. It's a big play, it's a big film that we're acting in, but we're also the spectators. So enjoy, and yeah, this is the greatest show on earth. You know, we're part of it. Yeah.
Hmm.